Hello and welcome to GFD North podcast. My name is Ryan Woodhouse and today I'll be interviewing Alex Jay Brady. But just before I interview Alex, I'd just like to intro the GFD North online event that's coming out this Saturday, September the 3rd at 9 a.m. So you can go on over to gfdnorth.uk and you can just scroll down and listen and watch some of the trailers for our presenters. And if you're just interested in checking out the podcast, you can go over to the podcast section and listen to some of our previous episodes with our other guests. We now have over 11 episodes. So just to give a quick intro to Alex and her work, Alex has a background in vehicle design from Coventry University. Some of her first jobs out of school was working as a CAD technician for Coventry City Council. She then went to work as a designer for Concept Group International, where she contributed body kit designs for the Land Rover, the interior accessories for Jaguar XCF, and many other clients as part of the internal CGI design team for the studio. She then went on to create concepts for luxury private jet interiors for Jones & Bowen, and then worked as concept artist for Alva Alta, creating architectural concepts. She then also worked at Rat Rod Studios designing vehicles for mobile games, and then again at Electronic Arts as the vehicle artist on the Battlefield Hardline series. And then moving on to MPC to work on Guardians of the Galaxy, and at 21st Century Fox on The Gone World, directed by Neil Blomkamp, concept artist at Karakter, Guerilla Games on the Horizon Zero Dawn, and Captain Marvel, Rorschach Studios, and senior concept artist at Creative Assembly, and most recently, concept artist at Digimancy Entertainment. On top of that, she has also worked as industrial design tutor for the Art Department Online School. So today we'll be going through some of her early work, her vehicle design process, and some of the work that she creates for her Patreon fans. So without any further ado, can I please welcome Alex to the podcast. Alex, how are you doing?
Hello, Ryan. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, I can't wait to go through your portfolio. I've obviously followed your work for many, many years. It was years and years ago when I first came across your stuff on, I believe, conceptart.org on the forums. So it's been a long time. So I'm really looking forward to going through some of this stuff today. So I was just thinking it'd be really interesting for everybody to hear about some of your earlier jobs and your process behind them and just some of your thoughts on that. So just to start out, we've got some of those jet interiors for Jones and Bowen that I mentioned during the intro of your work history. So these are really, really polished and quite different to the sci-fi work that you're currently working on most recently. So some of those early jobs, this was when you was learning your 3D tools and improving your pipeline and the software and all those kind of things.
Yes, that's right. These are, God, it's been a long time since I've seen these actually. So a lot of this was basically painted in Photoshop at very high resolution to fake nice renders, because I didn't really know how to do renders very well. I just learned the basics. So I built the kind of fuselage and seats and everything, and a lot of that texture on the top is Photoshop. So it's all a bit of a cheat, really, because I didn't, as I say, know how to do fancy renders.
Okay, so this was pure. So how much of this was 3D and how much of this was 2D Photoshop then?
So I would say you can see like the glasses and the windows, the hull, all of that's 3D. But then stuff like the leather texture, the carpet, fabric textures, stuff that nowadays I could do easily. I just had no idea how to do, and it was all a bit of a bodge.
That's it. But I think even in the early days, like being very careful with your perspective and all those things, it's where you start to build your skill that I think really comes in handy, years down the line when you're working as a professional. So,
yeah, definitely agree. It's good to study photos and good to study like high-end, architectural visualization and artists that you like that have good composition skills, because if you can compose an image well, that really helps to warm the viewer up to the idea that they're seeing if it's composed nicely. It's a bit like putting sugar in the food or something. It's sort of, without really realizing it, people like it a bit more, give it a bit more.
That's it. Yeah, it gives extra zest.
Reception.
So did this one ever go on to be produced, and did you ever get to see the final in real life?
I don't think so. I think Jones and Bowen, I'm not sure if they're still going. I know that they did a lot of watch design
Oh yeah.
which was more kind of, like lots of luxury high-end watches, and this was kind of a bit of a padding for their website, really, because
Oh,
it was
right.
just I didn't charge much at the time to do it.
Yeah. And did you help? Did you help also design some of those luxury watches, or did you move on at that point?
I did some renders for them. I didn't actually do the actual design work in those. That was a whole other universe. Swiss watch design is it's a very strange and interesting and intricate kind of universe of design that I'm not at all an expert in. So I wasn't doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest with you. Those luxury watches, it's not really my cup of tea. I know some people go absolutely crazy, for the fancy watches and things. But anyway, so moving on.
That's not how I'd waste my money. I'd waste it on sports cars.
Some of these things, exactly. Some of these things, cost the price of a small car. But anyway, yeah.
Right.
So so I was going to move on to this one. I know this one's quite popular in your portfolio. And I think it's quite recognisable. One of the more recognisable pieces that you've done. So I can see on the side it was created for the Sci-Fi Channel, and I'm guessing the process was the same process that you're using for your jet interiors at the time as well. So the 3D underbase and just working into them with photos and 2D work in Photoshop. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. It's always the same, really. If you scroll down that project, you can see the original sketch that the client gave me, and they already had a pretty clear idea what they wanted.
Oh, I think it's this is.
So
this
I
one?
just suggested. Yeah, if you can, I think within the project there should be a bar that you can scroll it down. There you go.
Can you still see the screen, by the way?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So you can see the sketch on the screen on the top left here, and then from this, you just go straight in and start to block out the interior, some of these retro furniture designs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I suggested that we turn the family around, and the art director, very gamely. That's him in the photo with his wife and their daughter. They did a lot of reference photos for me, so I could put them in, and it was actually kind of nice that they got to be in the picture. Yeah, and so this was from promo work to promote the TV show. The TV show had already been made, and they had this ship asset, and I just built everything else around it as quickly as I could, and painted on the top, and just tried to emulate that mid-century atomic style, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. I mean, it's even the way it's been painted as well reminds me of the kind of the retro sci-fi illustrations, especially
exactly.
on the ship.
I
in
love
this
that
area. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those retro sci-fi illustrations, they definitely got a nice quality to them. You actually sadly don't see too much of at the moment. I know a lot of people are massive fans of John Berkey and these kind of guys, and they try to replicate that style, but that kind of classic gouache sci-fi style is really nice.
That's right, yeah. Using gouache and Photoshop really is suited to that. It's very easy to kind of emulate that style, which is a lot of fun to work in, and it's nice to. Normally, I have to do stuff quickly and then move on, so it's nice on that one that they actually needed it very high res, so because they need to print it out massive. So it was nice to actually take a bit of time and go in and paint all the details, which is something I don't often get time to do.
Yeah, that's it. I also noticed as well at the very bottom of this slide of images, there's a desk. Did they need some kind of interior design work doing as well? Was this another mock-up for an interior? Or?
I think this was just earlier. They gave me they spelled out what they were thinking of doing, and this was my first response. Just like you could have a kind of American president, JFK kind of president, but transposed to the moon. And it was just done quickly, just to kind of give them a sense of the idea, which we didn't use. But it was nice to kind of, again, build out a room. It's always fun when you get a new assignment, because you then have to, think about the world and look at the technology, look at lots of reference photos and stuff. I find that a lot of fun, just to kind of learn a lot about something for a day or two, and then move on and forget it all.
Yeah, this is it. Part of the job, you end up becoming an expert in all these many different fields. You learn a small part of all these different things. It can be quite interesting.
It always reminds me of in a heist movie when they all learn a ton about the building that they've got a heist, or stuff that the day before you wouldn't have cared less about. It suddenly becomes really interesting to you. All the alarm systems or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Learning all these intricate details about some out-of-date piece of machinery works. It's all part of the job, and it can be quite interesting, some of it. We all end up with knowledge about 70s and 80s Soviet era vehicles, which can be funny. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so I saw this piece as well for the Captain Marvel. It was a Skrull capital ship, and I was reading the description. So he worked alongside Pablo Dominguez and production designer Andy Nicholson. So, and you also mentioned that you were looking. I mean, I don't know if you was inspired by super tankers from the 70s and 80s. What was the original inspiration for this, or was it kind of you were just like making stuff up on the fly, or?
So they wanted something that had this quality of the biological armor connected by kind of bones, if you like. And I fancied making it look like it emulated a star destroyer, or a giant battleship, basically, like this huge, heavy World War One battleship sitting really low in the water. And obviously, that is something that inspired star destroyers in Star Wars. I fancied kind of going along that battleship vibe, but mixed with a lobster or an insect or something.
Yeah, actually, now you say it, the serrated armor does remind me of shellfish and lobsters and crabs and things, which is actually quite classic to pull from in terms of a design inspiration, especially for spaceships. But I think
there's definitely some John Berkey in there. Lots of like this kind of strange details that he would paint in that it looks real, but you can't really work out what it is. It's like very odd. So maybe this thing has scales that can move over each other, and within the actual shell there's aliens walking around on the outside exposed to the elements or something. It's hard to figure out exactly what that detail is from a distance, but it feels like there's something going on in there.
Yeah, and saying that as well, there are some details that straight away remind me of that more organic form. So when you look at like the shell of a lobster, it does have all these small, tiny little bumps and things on the surface. But I think making, come up with the idea that, okay, there could be some kind of repairing, alien repairing machine or whatever crawling over the surface of this thing. I think it's a really interesting design idea.
Yeah, exactly. Like this implies that it's not technology like we make, which has panel cuts and things like that. This is something that's maybe been grown or exuded somehow. Like a mussel, like an oyster makes a pearl or something like that. Something a bit different from human technology.
Yeah, I can see as well there's some different variations on this.
Yes.
Actually, this is something I've noticed throughout your entire portfolio. You tend to do it a lot, and I mean a lot of iterations. I know that, as a designer you want to go through many ideas, but I really feel like it's one of your stronger points is you really do tend to push and explore the design before committing to something.
That's really because you're on. If you're getting paid by the hour, then every time they ask you to make changes, you're just like, brilliant, yeah, okay, because it's more money. So for my own projects, I like to just try and visualize a lot of it early on, and then just engage and do that, just because it's my project, it's my idea, I can do whatever I want, kind of thing. Whereas for other people, they'll often be like, yeah, that's great, but can you just change this and this and this? And that's why you'll often see there's my first ideas, and then they'll come back with some changes, then repeat the process over and over again until you get to the final. And that's why you get all of these variations, because often it's an evolution from sketch to final.
Yeah, that's it. And I think on the screen we can see this V-shaped version, so I'm assuming this is another variation of a proposal for this shape. Is that right?
It's basically in reverse chronological order. So those early ones are the things that when they first said, okay, we want it to be red, we want it to have this kind of spiky, armored vibe, blah, blah, blah. That's the sort of stuff that I first did. And then they were like, cool, that's interesting, but can you make it more of this shape? And spelled out kind of more of a battleshipy shape. And then I went away and did some more, and round and round it goes. And as I say, every time they say, can we have some changes? You're like, yes, sir, $3 full, sir, because
that's it.
You're billing them, so.
That's it. And also I've noticed actually in this series you haven't actually done many pen on paper sketches. I don't know if that's a choice that you did just for this job, or did you just feel like only sketching in 3D? Because I know in a lot of the other images that you start out actually with just pen on paper sketching, which is quite unusual. I don't know if there's many people that do it that way still. Everyone these days tends to jump straight into the 3D software, so I'm just wondering if you'd give a bit of insight into that. Is that something you still do, or is it something you sometimes do, or?
It really depends on my mood and also the time constraints and so on. I mean, sometimes it's good to just be able to get into 3D because you can make stuff procedurally very quickly and figure out which things are working and which things aren't from that kind of big, like using the machine to generate a load of random things. Or you can start from sketching because you can depict a whole world very quickly with just a few lines. Like if you look at a Mobius sketch, he's drawn everything very, quite quickly because it's a comic book artist, but you can still draw this very believable world that you can go into. So there's a huge amount of efficiency gain, if you like, to be just doing line drawings at the start, because you can gesture. To draw a whole planet, you can just draw a curved line in the sky, and that implies a planet. You know what I mean? So it's very, very time efficient, and it's fun to just let your imagination wander and try and depict what you've imagined as quickly as possible. And anything that's difficult within that, like a wall of bricks, you can then label it and just come back in 3D and build a model, put the brick texture on there. And so you let 3D do what it's good at, which is replication of a single object over and over again. If you've got to do like turbine blades, where it's an object that's rotationally turned around a central point many times, drawing that is a real pain, but you can do it in 3D really easily. So it's about figuring out what's easy to do in 2D, what's easy to do in textures on the surface of 3D objects, and what's easy to do in geometry. And I'm sure every game artist and low poly artist understands this. I'm preaching to the converted really, but it's a bit of a fine art to figure out which is the best way of conceptualizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you say, there are some things like rotor blades, which are just notoriously difficult. By the time you finish plotting up all these ellipses in perspective, exactly. you can just as easily just jump into 3D and get that stuff done, and it takes no time. So it's like you said, indicating something can be done so quickly in pen, but then sometimes the slowness of constructing something properly in perspective can really slow you down. So I think that really comes from experience and
definitely, because you'll have had a painful experience trying to draw something and then realize that there's an easier way in 3D, or painful experience in 3D and realize you can just do it quickly in a sketch that can sell the idea. I have seen a rendering of a jet engine cutaway done by hand, and it must have taken the person months. It's an epic undertaking.
Those old cutaway illustrations, there's an absolutely brilliant, I've got an absolutely brilliant book by a guy called Stephen Beastie.
I've got a few of those.
And all he does is cutaway architecture, and I know for a fact they're all done by hand, and honestly I swear it cuts. You see inside every single little HVAC pipe, cutaways, even cutaways with the toilet doors and stuff on these gigantic buildings. So that's a bit of a side tangent. But no, go back.
That's one of the questions in your list, is a book to get if you're a designer. I mean, it's not exactly breaking news, but definitely check out those cross sections books. They're all brilliant. The Star Wars ones and the real life ones. They're great.
Oh yeah. Really good. I really think the cross sections for architecture really helps you understand the structure, because I feel, at least for myself, when I started out in doing concept art, when you go to design a building, you only think about the facade or what looks cool on the outside. You don't really tend to think about, okay, well, where do the structural columns go? Especially on these more modern structures like by Zaha Hadid, the lattice, the complex outer steel framework looks beautiful in and of itself before there's even anything clad onto it. It's a really impressive, structural engineering design. You look at the Morpheus Hotel, for example. It's just this curled piece of steel. That's before they put any of those nice white tiles on it. It looks incredible. But anyway, to go back to that, so talking about things that are impossible to do, it's like things such as this Captain Marvel ship here. You've got this really complex graphic going over the side of the ship, of this really sculpted foam. And sometimes going in there and noodling this stuff with a pen or doing it in 2D just isn't time efficient. And it's like you were saying before, you really expected to pump out a ton of different designs. So who are you working with on these ship designs, and is it the same person?
So my art director was called Virginie Bourdin. It was her company that was contracted by Marvel, or the production company that was making the film, which was formed by Marvel. I think it was called Project Firebird. So that then subcontracts, there's a vast amount of design work that needs to be done, and we did a ton of work. I wasn't really working with anyone else apart from her, because I was at the bottom of the ladder, if you like, I was the designer, and then I would feed up to her, and then she would show it to the art director and various other people. So I would be at the end of the email chain, work with anyone else. But I just kind of did as I was asked, and these were based on an earlier set of sketches where they liked this kind of sort of very unhuman design. It looked like it's clearly not something made by people,
No,
it's made by insects or something alien.
Yeah.
But it's still aggressive. It's armored. It has a sense of it's a battleship. It's not a civilian ship, and maybe there's a sense that this armor can pull apart and reveal something inside, like where the weapons and the sensors are. It kind of conceal them, because the planet is surrounded by lots of asteroids, or the atmosphere is. The script changes over the course of the project, but the sense was that the atmosphere was full of lots of dust and rocks and things that would hurt, delicate instruments. So it needs to be shielded.
Yeah, and also just go to that point. I know you mentioned before you could see inside it. I just scrolled back up to the top, and obviously went through. I can tell by the post went through a ton of different iterations. I'm sure the people watching this can see there is just variation on variation of this thing.
Yeah. And this showed up for 2 seconds in the film. You know what I mean?
I was just saying, this is the thing about film. You can spend a long time, and then how much screen time does it have in the very end? But this is quite interesting.
I feel quite lucky actually to get stuff into a Marvel movie, because, as you say, there's so many. So many people work on it. So even for a couple of seconds, I was pleased. But,
absolutely, yeah. Still great job to have, obviously. And I know somebody's going to ask, so I'm just curious at this stage, what software do you use? Because I know somebody's going to ask, do you use Blender, do you use ZBrush?
I think that was built by Pablo and then sent back, just to sort of show how that my design had developed into what had become this. I guess it's the size of like the Aliens gunship style drop ship. Rather. In fact, there's a couple of stills from the film. I think the final concept art is the lower one, and then the still from the movie is the top. And it's blinking, you'll miss it. It's the very start of the film.
So here we've got the screen. Is this the screen cap from the film?
I think that's the final concept by Pablo, and maybe that is two. Yeah. And then if you go up a bit, there's that's the screen cap, and that's it.
Awesome.
So all of that work, and you end up with like literally just 2 seconds. But so it goes.
Yeah, that's how. Yeah, exactly. Oh, and great job, obviously, to Pablo as well for taking those and
his stuff's amazing.
And stuff. Yeah, it looks doing a great job with the texturing and taking that thing a bit further. So awesome job, Pablo, as well. Yeah. It's absolutely really impressive amount of iterations and stuff going on. So there we go, all the way to the end. I know you did another couple of others as well for this one. So you got the Captain Marvel, the Pegasus experimental jet, and this one feels quite familiar. Like it reminds me of those old stealth jets that the US.
That was my favourite one to do actually. Yeah. I really enjoyed that. Sort of a baby Blackbird.
Blackbird, that's it. Yeah. The cockpit.
So the idea was that they found this alien engine and they wanted to use a pre-existing ship to mount it and then fly it up to space and test it. And this was the kind of test missile ship that might do that.
And is this the alien engine?
So that's like the sketches of it deployed, and it's kind of warping space behind the rocket.
And again, going through that same...
these sketches... Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go on. Yeah, go on ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say these sketches were very early, and then they were given to Ash and Pablo and the others, and they were, out of my hands, and then they developed it into what you see in the film.
You can also see different variations of the aircraft in use. Technology being used as well.
So a command would have come down the chain saying, "Can you just switch the wings out for this style for this style?" And I would just do it.
Yeah. So when you're on the job, then would you say that you mostly focus on just creating the designs and the iterations for the vehicles, and less on the kind of the keyframes and how stuff works? Then?
Exactly. Yeah.
I also noticed there's a nice bit of Lego. I don't know what the reference is here. Did they take this design and create a Lego set of it as well?
I believe so. I think they did one for Comic-Con or something, which you can't buy it on general release, so I couldn't get a copy of it. But that was another big, it just made me feel good, because I played with Lego a lot when I was a kid. It was obviously very formative in the way that I have fun even to this day with 3D software and stuff. So it all feels like playing with Lego even now.
Yeah, that's it. I think as well, to get one of your designs made into the stuff they used to play with as a child is always, I think it's everyone's dream in the back of the head.
the
For
circle
sure.
is closed.
That's it. Exactly. That's it. Yeah. And I just noticed as well at the very bottom of the post, you got this kind of classic car. You have to forgive me, I actually don't know which one this is, or if this is an old Porsche or what it is. But what's the reference behind this? We're using this as a shading reference. Like, what is the relation?
Sometimes an object captures a vibe that you want to emulate, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, that's not a spaceship, that's a car, but it had that vibe of like laid back, swoopy, curvy, power, a lot of mass over the back wheel, long. It just, something about it was just exactly the vibe I wanted to go for, mixed with a Blackbird SR-71 stealth fighter spy plane. So that's the kind of spiritual inspiration for it.
Got it. Okay, so this was part of your inspiration for the design and the look and the feel.
Yeah, that most kind of condensed the vibe I was looking at.
Yeah. And actually looking at the rear of the car and looking at just above the wheel arch here, like the way, like I can kind of see some of the form of that back wheel arch, like replica. I don't know if you did this on purpose. I'm just making this up on the top of my head, but I can see like I was going to say like some of these like forms do feel similar to the car, and I can see some of that form coming through for sure, like the way the forms are tuck in towards the back here and pinch towards the rear. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, really nice work.
I guess the adjective I'd use is rakish. It has a rakish vibe that I like.
Yeah, cool. And did you get to do a final design pass or a call out for that alien technology as well?
No, they did something a bit different in the end. They did a sort of honeycomb shape, but it was, you could see that there was an evolution there. It was quite interesting how it evolved.
Okay. Now we're moving on to the Aston Martin Volanto Hoverspeeder. And I saw this and straight away I really liked this one. It's very organic in its form language, and it's very refined design. I can also see in the description mentioned Daniel Simon, an absolute powerhouse of a design. His work.
Yes, his stuff's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. It's really strong. Very fantastic work. So what was the inspiration behind this one then? I'm assuming some kind of creature or organic shape. Like, what was the initial inspiration?
Yeah. I mean, again, the E-Type image that we were looking at before, and that Blackbird, sort of baby Blackbird, was almost a kind of inspiration for this. But yeah, just trying to make something as sleek as a car that flies, because a lot of the kind of air taxis you see there, they use rotors and tilt rotors and stuff like that, but they're not very sleek. They're kind of blocky because they need to work. This doesn't actually need to function, so I can do whatever I want. The ones that actually have to fly have to have physical functions. Whereas this can just, you can imagine this has got anti-gravity or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, and awesome. We've got some of those design sketches we were talking about earlier. So I'm assuming you just went through a ton of these. Everyone can see that here.
Yeah, that's right. So I was working for a guy called Theo Priestley, and he's a lot of fun to work with. He just would say, "Oh, how about this idea? How about that?" And I was happy to have a go. So I started off with a lot of car-like sketches, and then these are more like E-Type kind of hover cars, I guess you could say. And over time, under Theo's feedback, we just moved it more and more towards a kind of halfway between a car and a plane, I guess you could describe it.
Yeah, and as you can see, I can see through these sketches you're going through the process of you're pulling forms out. Like I can actually in these sketches you can finally start to see those forward fins start to pull out and away from the body, and it's starting to become less of a car, and especially in these ones as well. Yeah, these are really nice.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was definitely my first thought, was to do a hover car, literally just a car that flies, like in Back to the Future or something. Whereas he was much more, or a spinner. There's a very spinner inspired design, and then he was more like, well, let's make it a bit more plane, like a bit more like a spaceship or something like that, space shuttle.
Yeah, gorgeous. And as well, just scrolling back up, you can see those initial, moving on from those sketches to those early 3D models where you're still kind of refining the design and checking how it looks at different angles and things. Yeah.
I spend a lot of time doing that because I'm not very good at modeling, proper surfacing, but I like to just sculpt and just move vertexes around. And if you have a symmetry on, so you can move one side and the other side does the same thing, it's nice just to tweak it over time and just try and just get it just. There's often a kind of niceness to something that it takes a while to find. It starts off and it's all right, and you move things around and you start to get a bit of a sense of it. And then you move some more stuff around, and maybe it moves away. It gets colder, and then you move it back. It's warmer again, and over time you make it hotter and hotter. If that makes sense. It's a bit of a game of hold on.
Yeah, especially as well. You just mentioned it can be quite difficult to model these turbo smooth forms. So I'm not sure 100% sure how you did this in your program. Is this, what is it, 3ds Max or?
Yeah, 3ds Max. Yeah,
3ds Max. Yeah, I mean,
I would use Alias, but I just properly model it. But I just not any good at it, so I just do my best. And then when there's like a bit of bad surfacing, I'll just paint it out in Photoshop. Usually, if it's a bit of 5 minutes of lasso tool, I'll just do that instead of trying to figure out the surface in 3D, which often gets very convoluted and messy after a while.
That's it. And I mean, when you're pushing and pulling those forms when the turbo smooth, sometimes you just want to add an engine, and you can end up going down like a dark path of pushing and pulling verts and lines around and things. So
that's absolutely right.
Yeah, very nice. And has anyone at Aston Martin actually seen this design? Has anyone sent you an email out?
I think Theo showed it to them, and they weren't that fussed. But then they did do a flying taxi concept not long after, so maybe that sowed the seed. I'm not sure. It was very different what they did. It was much more feasible. Like it could actually maybe function, whereas this obviously had nothing to do with reality. It was more like, as I say, a Blade Runner spinner or something. But maybe, I mean, you never know.
Yeah, you never know. Like some of these projects sometimes do get picked up in the team.
That's it. I mean, if you sort of saturate the internet with your work, there's a good chance that other designers are going to potentially have it on their reference page. You know what I mean? The client might say, "Can you do it a bit?" They'll present them a kind of page of references, and it might be in there or something. So you can sort of influence without. You don't get any credit, obviously, but you can kind of, maybe get your ideas out there, and maybe they'll kind of come back eventually.
Awesome. Yeah. Very nice. Okay. And this one we've actually got on the GFD North.uk website as advertising as your work. So what is the background story behind this? Like, why did you create this piece? I can see this.
Again, this was something that was asked for by a guy called Bastian Koch. Koch or Koch, I'm not quite sure how his second name is pronounced. So apologies for butchering it, Bastian. But yeah, he just said, "Can you do me like a kind of bio Evangelion inspired drone jet?" And this was one of my attempts to satisfy that idea.
Yeah, and playing around with a kind of a soft or flexible metal surface.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you never know, one day it may actually become a reality.
So the idea that this, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Eva. I loved Evangelion when I was growing up as a sort of late teens, early 20s. It really affected me deeply. Like, it was very big influence on me. And so all my work often has this kind of tribute to Evangelion in it, So things are kind of flexible, and maybe they've got blood inside for some reason. It's just that vibe. I found it so haunting. It's like this kind of mixture of completely bizarre but strangely, it's like a nightmare. When you're in it, it's very believable, even though when you look at it from waking, it seems ridiculous. When you're in the nightmare, it's strangely credible, and that's Eva in a nutshell for me. It's like a
I actually do remember Evangelion when I was younger. I mean, I was never one of those that was really into anime, but I did have a friend who really was, and every time I'd go around, there'd be something on, and so I'd watch a couple episodes, and I'm pretty sure Evangelion's one where the city shrinks into the ground, right? And then up,
doesn't make any sense, but it's
cool. So the city, I think if I can remember that, the city kind of retracts into the ground, and these gigantic robots rise up to fight. I can't remember the exact story, so I'm going to stop because I'm going to butcher it. Because I know the Evangelion fans are probably screaming right now. You get it wrong, but I do remember the bits, and obviously the designs are very strong.
Everything about the kind of presentation is very good, and the story does go nice and deep. I mean, there are some good breakdowns on YouTube of the characters and their motivations, which are very, adult, I would say, is fair to say. But there's a lot of just fun eye candy in it, and also particularly the final movie is so spectacular. Like, it's the editing, the music, obviously the design, the direction, everything about it is just mind-blowing for better and worse. It's a truly shocking experience particularly to a kid. It really messed me up.
Yeah,
Like, it's horrifying, it's awe-inspiring. It really matches the music, like the Beethoven and the Bach music feel like they were waiting for Eva to come along to match them visually. It's how I imagine when I was listening to those pieces of music as a kid, what it would be like to see gods do battle, to see the apocalypse take place. That's that awe and horror, and it's glorious as well. That's how Eva really hit me. It's amazing. Yeah, very, very.
Yeah, I think as well.
I'm sure to watch it now, it wouldn't have that magic necessarily as it did then. But like I say, late teens, early 20s, it absolutely blew me away.
Yeah, it's sadly it's one of those things when you're younger. Like the big, like animated. I saw the big eyes and just the style, and it put me off. And like I said, I mean, obviously did see a
I can
few
completely
like
understand.
like Cowboy Bebop. What else? Like Akira and all these different things. I mean, obviously I didn't see them and watch them, but when you're younger, it either really clicks for you or it doesn't. But I think when you get older and you look at just the design work, you can actually really start to appreciate them, like all the detail, the style 100%. Of the design is completely different from anything in the West. So yeah,
I had an art teacher who was very big into Alan Moore, and he introduced me to Watchmen, the book, and he also said, "You've got to watch this." And he showed, he gave me VHS tapes of like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, and so to a sort of, I guess I was about 12, 13, 14. Me and my mates were all just completely, we couldn't believe it, how fucking crazy this stuff was. We loved that kind of thing from then on. And obviously, American films like Aliens and Predator and things like that were big. 2001, things like that. But the Japanese movies were just so incredible. Satoshi Kon. My mind's going blank for names now, but there was a whole group. Obviously Miyazaki as well. There's a whole group of these things that just these movies that just absolutely melted my brain. It opened my eyes to what was possible just with drawing and a few lines and some color. It's just like, wow.
The designs of the Japanese animes and just the film and the animes that come out, it's just so strong in general, and the ideas they've always been strong. And really crazy,
so
really crazy as well. They really did. They just weren't afraid at all. They really have pushed them, compared to sadly compared
and look
to
at the success of it as well. I mean, that's what they were completely unafraid of just pushing boundaries. I'm sure there were big arguments at the time when they were making them, but the results speak for themselves. They're absolutely amazing, and like huge commercial success as well. A lot of them. So that should be an encouragement to anyone. If you're doing your own work, don't be afraid, and just trust your gut. And stick with it, and never know, some of these things might actually work.
Yeah, I think that's actually really good advice. I mean, always to push the design as hard as you can, to really push it out there from just what you're expecting, what's currently on the market right now, or just completely try to push it beyond the most recent sci-fi film, and that's probably your best bet as a designer to really probably get noticed.
I mean, there's something to be said for riding a trend, obviously. Not saying that's a bad move by any means. Like, if there's a certain vibe in the air at the moment, absolutely, if you're into it, go for it. No, I'm not saying you should always try and do something else, but it's definitely fun to try and carve out your own niche. It means you'll never be super on trend, but you'll probably never be completely out of fashion too. It's kind of hedging your bets.
Yeah, that's true. It's true because like you say, doing those things which are on trend, they will be popular. But then I always hear the story of, so-and-so art director picked up someone because the stuff was completely different and they wanted a fresh take on an IP, or they just wanted something a bit different for their IP or the game or the film, whatever. So I hear that story a few times as well. Anyway, so moving on to that, actually, this is actually a good side path, because you got your take on something that is actually quite well known, and it's actually very different to the film. And this is obviously the Dune, so it's quite different compared to what's in the most recent. Well, I should say the most recent film that I've seen, which came out just at the end towards the end of last year. So that's the Dune franchise. So for your worm, you went for like a gigantic black, like slick black reflective type of thing, whereas the one at the minute, it looks. I mean, it's a very sandy kind of leathery looking worm.
I think that's probably more book accurate. I think that the current movie is very close to how I remember. It's been a while since I read Dune #1, but the recent movie seems bang on. Like they really nailed it in terms of vibe. I love the David Lynch version. It's such a, excuse me, windy pops. It's such a strange. It shouldn't exist. It's a failure. It's a disaster. It's blah blah blah. But it's just such a treat as well. It's so rich and weird and gross. It's a treat that David Lynch ever got to make a sci-fi film. It's like something from an alternate universe or something. But the new one really nails the book. I think it's very much they tweak stuff here and there, but it's very much the vibe I remember from reading it. So I think they did a great job. But in my personal work, I'm free to do stuff that I think is less commercial, so I can do stuff that's stranger, and hence a lot of my Dune stuff is a bit more like the Jodorowsky sort of psychedelic vibe, which I think is very important to Dune as well. Like obviously there's a lot of psychedelic drugs in Dune, and I'm sure inspired Dune. I think it's fair to say that if Frank Herbert didn't take drugs, he definitely knew people who had taken them and made music based on it and stuff. You know what I mean? There's a very psychedelic vibe all through it, so in a good way.
There's actually I'd actually recommend, if anybody hasn't read the book, I'd recommend picking up, because when I saw the film, the most recent one anyway, there's a scene in the book where somebody dies, like one of the Fremen, they die, and they pick up the body and take it to a chamber to be processed, to have the water taken from the body, because water is so precious, right? So they even harvest the water from the dead bodies, but obviously because that's quite graphic and strange. Well, I think this is probably the reason, because that's quite graphic and strange, they decided to drop that from the most recent film, and that was actually
one of the few. I was going to say that was one of the few things that did jump out at me. There's the guy watering the trees. They've got like palms, that they use to water, and the tool that he used wasn't very water discipline efficient. Like it was just a ladle in a bucket, and I'm sure the Fremen would have used something that was so much more water efficient than that. That was one of the few bits of prop design in the film I didn't actually like, because a lot of the movie I thought was absolutely bang on. I loved it, but that one thing with the water, that they could have made more of the fact that device that he was using was reclaiming every little drop.
This is it,
and
also to go into that idea of just purely just to criticise the design, you'd think the thing that they use for getting rid of water would be quite maybe elaborate compared to just the everyday tools, because if water is so precious, surely the thing that they use for handling it would be quite precious as well, or maybe have some kind of inscriptions on it or something. But I think that's an interesting point to make. I think the other thing as well is just how different the older Dune is compared to the more recent one. I actually feel that the designs in the older Dune were, what is it, 1980 something? I can't remember.
84. So they must have made it in about 82 because it was released in 84.
I really feel those 1980s Dune designs were really, much crazier than the most recent one.
I love the film. I've watched it. It's one of those films that I can just put on and watch or listen to the soundtrack a lot, whenever. I'm quite happy just to stick the Dune soundtrack on in the mornings. I go for a run in the mornings at the beach sometimes, and it's just like amazing to walk along the breakers with the Dune soundtrack playing. You really feel like just full of energy. It's amazing, like especially if you just have a sugary coffee as well. Anyway, so the older movie, the sets are so much grimier and more detailed. The newer one, you get a sense that they just have to get it done, get it sorted, get it out. I think for the second one, now that it's been a huge smash, you'll see a lot more intricacy in the design, because they'll know that they can spend that time and it'll be worth it. They didn't just have to, like you said, the recent movie, you could perhaps find places where there could be more detail and it looks a bit sparse. And I think it's just on the one hand, that's the vibe, minimal. These are government buildings, etc. You can think of story reasons for it.
It's true.
But I think the second one will be much more intricate.
Yeah, for sure. And to go into that as well, like you say, there's some scenes in the more recent Dune film which are very open, very sparse, and quite minimal. So it's a completely different take, I think. And I think they probably did it on purpose when they went to art directing and thinking, what this should look like. I think they really tried to make it look completely different from the 80s version, which is fine, and it is a completely different taste, And like I said, I did enjoy it quite a lot, and I believe they are making a follow-up one as well. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, I think they'll conclude Dune, the book 1, and then I don't know whether they'll continue the movies after that, because the story gets very it gets a lot more Game of Thronesy, and the whole format suits a TV show. I think lots of talking, lots of intrigue. It's not really suited to a 3-hour movie. It's much more something you could watch on Netflix, or you know what I mean. Like early Game of Thrones is much more closer to the vibe of later Dune.
Yeah, this is it. And actually, you just reminded me again, just thinking back to when I read the book a long time ago. I'm sure there's a scene where there's a massive fight in a palace, and obviously that wasn't included in the book because it just ended like halfway through.
Yeah, it did stop a bit abruptly. They could have done a bit more of a awe-inspiring end. I think they could have at least had a sandworm go past, you know, or something, you know, a bit more. Maybe the camera pans up to the moon and you see the hand on the moon or something. It was just a bit blank, but they pulled it off. It was a huge success. I'm pretty excited, to be honest. I mean, it's a good time to be a Dune fan. I think there are elements of it.
Anyway, so like you were saying, I think it's a really good time at the minute for sci-fi in general. Netflix have been pumping out a lot of, we're taking a lot of novels and adapting them to TV series. Altered Carbon. I mean, there's just been quite a lot of like different ones. So it's been really good. But anyway, just to go back to your Patreon work. So you've been doing all kinds of different designs for Dune. And some of these actually aren't, you know, anything I've seen in the films or anything at all. So,
excuse me.
So for this one, this Space and Guild Heighliner. So it's almost like a gigantic tube with steel. I mean, I'm assuming these are a variation of a kind of a spaceship flying into this thing. So what is the inspiration behind this then? Like, what is the thinking behind it?
So the one in the '84 movie was a cylinder, and I love the idea that the ends of the cylinder almost link the ends of a kind of contorted space-time wormhole, which is what they did in the movie. They did a beautiful job of showing that one end of the ship is literally at Caladan and the other end is at Arrakis, which I think is a fantastic idea. And the ship kind of warps itself between these two locations without physically moving. And so in the books, they describe this Heighliner as very minimal in design, and it's just a kind of box or a tube. You fill it up with, it's massive. I mean, it's like 40 miles long or something. Fill it up with as much stuff as you can, and then you just engage this warp drive thing, and the navigator joins these two locations together with his in concert with the engines of the ship, the Holtzman drive, and uses their prescient power to make sure that the warping of space doesn't go through a star or something, so that the ship isn't destroyed in transit. And that's what this giant gold elaborate looking thing is. It's just a huge boat, basically. Yeah,
gigantic boat. I can see as well, it looks like an ancient Roman coin above the entrance for these things that are flying in. So what is this? Is this a guild coin or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to show the age of the guild. I wanted to give a sense of, like, for example, the Atreides family in the book claim that their family goes back to ancient Greece. They're very ancient, which is, you know, it adds to the legitimacy of their power, I guess, the kind of sense of their old money. And the guild, that shows their monopoly on trade. That's also a symbol of pay your toll. There's also a myth in, I think, Greek mythology of Charon or Charon, the boatman of the dead, the ferryman of the dead, and you would put a coin in the corpse's mouth so that he would ferry them across the river to the afterlife. You would leave this coin for him. So all of these kind of symbols wrapped together. I just Googled like old Roman coins and found one that I thought was or Greek, I forget exactly. I think it's Greek. I sound like I'm so ignorant, don't I? I
think people let you
something
off
to give that
ancient
vibe
coin
of like
knowledge.
Ancient future and the power and monopoly of the guild.
Yeah, it's really strong, really interesting design as well. Design choice to have, you know, something like that just hovering above the main entrance to the thing. It gives it an extra level of unusual flair. So
I'm not sure if it's real or a hologram. It could be a bit of a flex if that's actual gold or something. You know what I mean? Yeah. The ship was fun to do because it's using procedural. What it is, the process is you make a very high a very highly subdivided cylinder, and then you use a pro-optimizing algorithm to reduce the number of faces, and at a certain percentage of the algorithm operating, it creates lots of beautiful patterns, these kind of semi-periodic
Yeah.
tilings, where there's areas of periodicity and then a kind of boundary, and it's a lot like you see in crystals and stuff like that, which I think is so beautiful. I love how this complexity emerges so easily and readily. Just a simple mathematical operation running, it very quickly derives this kind of patternation, which is almost periodic but doesn't quite repeat. So it's a bit more fun for your eye to kind of dive into.
Yeah, this is it. I tell you, this would look amazing as well to see a shot from the inside and have the light pouring in, and so you can see all these ships that have parked up inside, and you get all this dappled
Yes,
light peering
yeah.
through the outer shell of this tube. Yeah.
I really love the sequence in the '84 movie where they go into the Heighliner as well. There's a lot of just in that movie of just like watching things go past, or ships flying into stuff, flying past. But it's a fun experience. It's like a huge golden door, which I think is just an amazing image. I love that sequence when they go inside, and then inside the Heighliner, it's complete darkness. Like the guild doesn't have any kind of, they're not interested in your welfare as apart from we take you from point A to point B, but apart from that, you're on your own. It's just this giant dark void.
Yeah, I think I'll have to rewatch that old Dune, because sadly the only thing that sticks, it was such a long time, I think it was like 10 years ago since I last watched it, so I think I'll have to give it another watch, because the only thing that sticks in my mind was just how much they pushed the character design in that older version. So,
I think it goes off the rails a bit towards the end because they had to wrap up the film, but I think it sets up the vibe really well, and I think the cast is really good as well, and the music and stuff. So yeah, I think it's still online, a fan edit of all of the footage that exists, basically. So there's like a hand-drawn illustrated intro made for the TV transmission of the movie. I think it was probably cut into a mini-series, but it was basically, there's like a big intro telling you, the viewer, about the different factions. Then there's the movie, and then they've interspliced all of the kind of bits of footage that weren't used, and off-cuts and very rough bits of footage that aren't suitable for a movie, but if you're a true fan, you want to see everything they've made, and it's about 4 hours long. It's a great watch. I really enjoy it. It's like an afternoon's worth. Yeah, it's great.
One of those where you get yourself a brew and you stick that thing on, and you lock yourself in for those 4
intermissions and stuff. You need to take breaks.
That's it. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely talking about Juice, but really making me just want to go and watch those old versions again. Anyway, so moving on now. So talked a ton about Dune, but I know you've done like a lot of other books as well for your Patreon, and so one of them, and this is actually a guy that I've never actually heard of before, which is by a guy inspired by a guy called Iain M. So there's Chaga, and this one really caught my eye again, just because it's so unusual, and there's elements in here which you wouldn't normally. I think this is probably the key to why it's so strong, is you don't normally pair these elements together in your head, and I think it makes it quite iconic. So you've got one of these huge things for moving. I believe they originally used for moving like shuttles and things like that, right?
That's right. That's exactly what that is. Repurposed to be a kind of mobile laboratory.
Mm-hmm. And this gigantic cliff in the background, is this something from the book, like some kind of fungus?
Yeah. So in the story, there's a whole kind of genre of stories that I don't know if you've seen the movie Annihilation, or there's a game and movie called Stalker.
Oh, yeah.
There's a kind of vibe of these books where an alien visitation comes to Earth that is completely unlike little green men with UFOs. It's just truly alien, like an alien life form that is different to what we have on Earth, and who knows whether it's intelligent, who knows where it came from, what does it mean. It's that kind of openness is much more interesting to me than Martians want to invade to take over. It's different, and Chaga is the name given to this organism that forms. It lands on the side of Kilimanjaro and slowly spreads out from where it lands, and I think in a few other places, and just starts to overrun the landscape. And it's just about what it's like to live through that. It's well worth the read. I think Ian McDonald's stuff is a bit 90s for good and for bad. So there's it's a bit it's a bit dated in places, but there's plenty of good stuff in there, and it's well worth an audiobook if you can find it on Audible. And as I say, I'm a huge fan of a book called Roadside Picnic, which is the basis for the movie Stalker, the game Stalker, and then that inspired Annihilation and Chaga as well, and many others. it's a terrific book, and this idea of the alien coming into our world, and what do we do with it? Like in Roadside Picnic, what we do with it is the army cordon it off, and then gangsters, basically organized crime, penetrate the surroundings and get in there and
parts of it,
steal as much stuff as they can for the black market, which is very believable. It's by a Russian guy, a pair of Russian guys, brothers, but it's set in Sopranos America, like Rust Belt gangster America. It's fucking fantastic. Well worth a read. Roadside Picnic.
I'm going to say, I remember reading that again quite a while ago, and there's a brilliant scene where they're organising a trip into this place, and they're in a bar, and then it describes them, going into the area, and some of the effects. And there's like some kind of like, doesn't it affect people if they're in there too long, or they go in certain areas?
Yeah, it starts to change the people. I'm glad that's come through in the game. If you like the game world, you'll love the book, because that's all lifted from the book. Like the bar where these stalkers meet, and then their sons grow up into the business. People die constantly because it's so dangerous, but it's so lucrative that if you've got no other prospects, it's a bit like you're in a life you can't get out. There's no other opportunities. These guys have nothing else, so they have to just keep going back in. And over time, the very best, most intelligent of them, who've avoided all the traps for so long, are all that's left. And it's just it follows this guy from like young idealistic kid through to grizzled 35, 40-year-old, across 20 years of his life as a stalker. And it applies to everyone's life. It's set in a sci-fi world to an extent, but there's a lot of very beautiful, witty observations about human nature in it, which I think is really what makes it stand up. Like I say, if I had Amazon money, I would get the guy who made Sopranos, David Chase, and his crew to make Roadside Picnic, because that's the vibe, that kind of dark irony of Sopranos.
Well, I've got to be honest with you,
it's perfect.
Yeah, I'm going to say, there's been so many sci-fi novels picked up in the recent years that they probably will do. They probably will pick up Roadside Picnic and turn it into something. Fingers crossed, I hope they do, because there's so many great visuals, like you say, in that series. Purely just to see what that alien technology looks like and how they use it, and them sneaking it back across in like some, I can't remember exactly, like some kind of hovering vehicle, I think I remember is one of the scenes. Really interesting stuff.
It sort of hints at the technology from the zone that has been incorporated into human technology, and so you've got the batteries and the other kind of commodities that have come out of it, but you also have the weaponry. The darker side of technology is exactly what we would do with that kind of thing, as we have in all of the technology we've developed in our culture. It's always used as a weapon as well as a tool, and that is very cynically observed in the book. It's really good, really good book.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out. And obviously, and Iain McDonald as well. Give Iain McDonald.
We got Divert there. Yeah, so his stuff is similar. It's definitely inspired by, but it's less dark. It's more. The Chaga it could be here to communicate. We don't know. It's less hostile. It kind of absorbs technology and changes living things, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily a weapon. It's not necessarily an invasion. No one really knows, and that adds to the kind of mystery of it. So they're studying it with this mobile laboratory as it slowly moves forward like a glacier across the landscape. And people are like, is it going to cover the entire Earth? We don't know. So yeah, it's good. It's the mystery is what it's all about for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sounds like a great book. I haven't had a chance to read this one yet. And also, just for the people watching, if you go to this page, there's actually a video on the last on the last image, which is just a process of Alex just creating this image, and actually not using 3D in this case, just starting out with a 2D sketch and working into that thing and adding the different elements. And you can see step by step how he built that thing up. So that's really interesting to see as well. Yeah.
I'll put one of those with each project so that people can see how it goes from from whatever the start point is to whatever the end point is. Like you say, that was just a kind of Photoshop because I knew the idea and I wanted just to quickly illustrate it. If I was to take this further, I would build that 3D crawler and build the Chaga wall and everything and detail it all out, which I may yet do. But for the amount of time I had for that month, I wanted just to get the idea done and then can come back to it.
Yeah, that's it. And as well, it's like I say, it's quite similar to what we were talking about before, where you would start out with pen on paper sketches, And then, well, at least in this version for Iain M Banks, it seems like you did actually go in and create a 3D model of some of these structures and overlay that on top of those 2D backgrounds. And sadly, like I said before the call, I haven't actually read too much of Iain M Banks, which is shame on me because I know he's very very popular and well known. So maybe I should grab a copy of one of his more well known books. But I'll definitely have to check.
I certainly liked it. As I say, we were talking before the call went to live, which Iain Banks book to choose, and I was saying that I think Player of Games is definitely my personal favourite. I think, having read many of them. But any of them were a lot of fun. Fearsome Engine was my other suggestion. It's nothing to do with culture, and it didn't have much deeper philosophical meat in the way that I felt Player of Games or some of the others did. But it's just a brilliant sci-fi action story with fun characters, which is surprisingly difficult to pull off. I think it's a real banger. If you like Aliens or kind of Terminator 2, just like really good quality action dramas like that with a bit of sci-fi, you'll love it. It's a real banger. I loved it.
Yeah, it sounds good. I think as well, if you're looking for something more, I know I did spot this one in your portfolio as I was preparing for the call, so I'm just going to jump back to it. But you actually did one of my favourite. It's actually one of my favourite of all time books, and you did the one of the main characters from the Hyperion series. I can't remember what they call this thing now. I can't remember.
Legrich, the Shrike.
Yeah, the Shrike. That's it. So you get these pilgrims going to be. I mean, I'm pretty sure they just go to be killed by this thing. So the Shrike pilgrimage is a huge part of the book, and it follows the story of these. I think there's 12. Is it 12 characters in total? There's many characters.
Something like it has the format of the Canterbury Tales, doesn't it? So they each tell their story on the journey to each other.
Yeah.
As they slowly go through their pilgrimage, they each tell you their background.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact number, but there's quite a few, and each character's story was so different that as you read in the book, it really did feel like you're going on a journey through these different worlds and different planets, and different time periods. And just seeing this piece, it just reminded me of reading the book. It brought back a lot of good memories. And I actually recognised this character because one of the characters in the book is carrying around this child, and the child is aging backwards because she visited the time tombs, and whatever, I can't remember the exact details now, but whatever it is, it causes this person to age backwards, and so one of the characters is trying to carry his own daughter to obviously to remove whatever's wrong with her, and so he finally gets there, doesn't he? He's carrying this essentially a newborn child, and that's just one of the characters, and you learn about his story. So that's another really strong book, which I absolutely loved reading.
Yeah, I agree. It really drew each character really in detail, didn't it? It let you really live with them for a while. And so, although the sci-fi bit was, kind of wacky sci-fi, his story made you really feel what it must be like to have a kid who gets sick. It must be really, really horrible and tough and very sad. And that really was very affecting. Another character, he had a very long life, and he was the playwright guy. I thought he was a good character, Martin. It just followed lots of these characters. It wasn't like the world's greatest book or anything, but it definitely had a kind of dark magic to it, which I enjoyed, and definitely would.
Yeah, did one of those first. I mean, one of the first characters that the book introduces is, I believe, like a religious type, and he's got a cross, and this cross is stuck underneath his skin, and it causes him an immense pain. And I mean, I don't want to spoil the book for people, but it gives a really kind of graphic and grisly depiction of this guy trying to get this thing finally. I mean, it turns out this cross that's buried beneath his skin is actually like some kind of alien artifact or something, and he basically tries to kill himself to get this cross out of his skin, and he ties himself to one of these trees that's constantly either on fire or giving off electricity. And like I say, the book gives some really graphic descriptions of that. It's always stuck in my memory. I've been quite
even talking about it now, it's almost silly, but when you read it, it does kind of capture you. It's like a dream. It kind of has a momentum of its own, so that when you're in it, it really feels very, very affecting. It's good. I definitely think there's was issues with some of Dan Simmons' books. I didn't really enjoy some of the later ones nearly as much, but that one certainly felt like he toiled on it for about 15 years. It felt like he had all of his energy from all of that time put into it, and
for sure.
It felt like a real kind of good vibe.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. That's fantastic. No, just to go back to, because I know I also had a couple of questions regarding just some of your professional experiences. So we've gone over some of your Patreon work and some of the stuff you've done for June and covering different novels. So I can see going back to like more of your freelance work. So this was a piece done for Ecopunk 2044.
Mm-hmm.
So would you be able to just give us a bit more information about? So is this for a game, a film, or? So
I believe it's a role-playing tabletop game, and set in this future world. The style guide gave me a lot of the ingredients I needed to include. For example, these giant statues of revered thinkers, I guess, to the civilization, and the risen oceans. And then the rest was really in my hands, just to have a pop at creating this kind of protected walled cities of the rich, and the flooded slums outside. It's kind of a blunt kind of message of like the rich living in their kind of ziggurats. But it's fun to do a painting like that once in a while and really go into detail again. So it was nice to design the arcology and really detail it out. This kind of pleasure dome, walled off from everyone else by the defences and surrounded by a deepening flood, basically, as the oceans rise, and they're just partying inside.
But well, sadly, that's pretty much the way things are going at the minute.
They've been going that way for hundreds of years.
Yeah. I'm going to say, if planet keeps on getting warmer, it's going beyond the point where the UK is getting like Spain now. It's actually getting quite scary. So, but anyway, no, you can grab the 7,000 pixel version of this if you want to go and see all that minute detail as well that you put into this. I also noticed as well that you started out again with doing some sketches on paper and scanning these in. So is this just purely something that you would do for yourself? Do you ever send these off to the client, or is this purely, like I say, just for yourself?
Yeah, no, I do a lot of line drawing and just send it to them and say, ignore the fact that it's a line drawing on paper, biro. What do you think about, the general composition, the details, etc.? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, I like this, and change this, and you just do as they ask.
That's it. As well, if you do want to go check out this on the ArtStation page and just cycle down to the bottom, there is a little bit of a video here just showing the details and the close-ups of this, so you can go and check that out.
Obviously inspired by Blade Runner and things like that, just these giant pyramids of the super rich rising above everyone else as they start to get flooded.
Yeah, there's tons and tons of detail in there. So that's a great one. And actually, this would be a good segue. So you've obviously worked for many different clients, and you've had a lot of industry experiences. And so I think probably what a lot of new people just breaking into the industry kind of want to know is what do you feel is the most kind of important professional traits for someone to have as they're breaking in? Or do you have, or I guess a better question would be like, what would your advice be to someone who's breaking in now?
I guess it depends. I mean, I like to do my own thing. I find I don't really like working in an office. I like to work from home, things like that. So that take any advice I give with a pinch or a truckload of salt, I would say. But I think just being somewhat reliable, obviously, is useful, because they'll be using you to forward their own goals. So you have to kind of, help them do that. But have confidence in yourself. Don't be a pushover. Don't undercharge. Charge as much as you dare. Because if you're charging a small amount, you're not only screwing yourself, you're screwing everyone else, because it makes it harder for everyone to negotiate a living wage. So charge as much as you can. Be confident in yourself. Be persistent. Do exactly what you're asked as quickly as you can, because then you can just get the iterations done. If you feel frustrations in your professional work, express them in your personal work. So if people are like, you know, your professional work is kind of a bit dull, you know, I have a lot of dull work that I have to do just to pay the bills. In your personal work, you can do stuff that is more zany, to balance it. So you don't end up kind of in friction because you're trying to do stuff that the client doesn't want. But you know, you can take good ideas that you aren't able to do in your professional work and put them into personal, or vice versa. There's a bleed over. What else? Yeah, be persistent. I mean, it's taken me ages to get to the point where I can fill my calendar with work. And also, I used to load up with too much, and I would burn out and lose everything. It was a nightmare. So the confidence to just say, I can't do this, is often a good trait. Or I could tell them exactly how much time you want to commit to the project and how much you have, how much, you know, so they know up front. You don't want to surprise them later on by saying, oh, actually, you know, I can't work all of these hours, because then it's already too late. They've planned for everything. Up front, just say, I can only work these particular times, and if it's not going to work out, no worries, you know. And if they want to work with you, that's great, or if they want to come back later, that's great. Be confident in that, because if you work yourself to the bone, you'll just make yourself sick and not be able to do any work. And then if you try and please everyone, you end up pleasing nobody. That's the thing I've found.
It's so true.
It's the lesson I have to try and tell myself every day as well, like, because it's so easy to say yes, I'll sort it, don't worry, because you don't want to lose their custom. But just don't, you know, be confident in the fact that you want to do this as a marathon, not a sprint. Cranking like all the time, mad hours, you'll get sick. Your immune system will be shot. You won't be sleeping right. You'll be eating crap. Smoking too much, if that's your thing. Coffee, you know, it all just ruins your immune system, and
guilty,
you get
absolutely guilty. You know, I think it's very easy as well. You know, when you first breaking in, you really want to, like you said, you want to do a good job. So you know, you do have this thing. Oh,
exactly.
I'm going to push it. I'm going to stay up all night. Drink. Totally guilty when you're saying that. It's like, you know, face started going red. You know, I'm definitely one of those that push the coffee, push the hours, and you do. You're absolutely right. You do get burned out. And
I mean, fair enough if you want to blow them away with a bit of, you know, flair, but don't do it on the reg, because you'll get completely screwed. And to be honest, I don't really find that they are super impressed that you do loads of work. They're more just like, great, keep doing loads of work. It's like they've got a machine that's really good at drawing, you know. They'll just use it. So they don't reward you for working yourself to the bone, really.
Absolutely. And I think as well, just to go back to another point you just mentioned about taking on a lot of different projects, I think as well, I mean, obviously for the new person breaking in, they're probably not going to have a great idea of how much how much time a project takes. So I think that's one of those as well where you've really got to be careful. Maybe that comes with you know, more experience, where you can, you know, learn, okay, well, this piece will take, you know, a certain amount of time, and this piece, you know, takes, you know, such amount of time. So you can learn to time yourself a bit more, a bit better, but it does come with experience, I guess.
And that's why I do a lot of sketching, because then you can do a sketch in 20 minutes that encapsulates your ideas, or, you know, 10 sketches, however many you want to do, a day's worth, show them to them, and then they'll pick the things they like and sign off on it, and then you know you're safe to plow a day into that, 2 days, 3 days, however long it takes. Show them again. If they're all happy, they've got a few changes, go through that cycle a few times, get to the finished product, they're happy because they've signed off on every stage, and then render a massive 7,000 pixel version, kick it out the door. You know, it's done, because you've got that sign off all the way through, so you haven't invested a ton of time in something that they've then gone, actually, sorry, you spent 5 days on that, but we want something else. That's really frustrating, especially if you're not billing by the hour.
That's it. And actually, that's a really good segue, because another question I had was, okay, for example, you spent 5 days on a piece and you kind of come up against the challenge. So have you ever had like any challenges, like working with like art directors or with certain studios, and how did you overcome them? Like, was there sometimes maybe like a miscommunication? Was there, you know, some kind of like issue that maybe came up, and how did you overcome that?
Sometimes projects are just in a difficult state, but I've found pros generally are easy to work with, proper pros, because they've done it so many times. They know exactly how long it's going to take. They don't get mad, you know. They're not easily rattled by problems. They don't get pissy. They're professionals, right? They're cool. But sometimes things are very stressful and people get get a bit shirty with each other and stuff, which can, it's a real problem. So I found, to be honest, I prefer working from home where I can just communicate via email and calls rather than commuting to an office or a studio. So other people have a very different, what they like about their job is they love to go into the office and stuff like that. So that's fine. I've always personally found I like to work from my own home, my hours, and that I just don't burn out as quickly. I'm more sustainable that way. So I found that in emails I can say stuff much more politically diplomatic. I can express myself much more to the point, not irritate people accidentally by putting my foot in my mouth. I can just say my thoughts, and the project runs much more smoothly than if I'm there in person trying to put sentences together. Because I'm not very sociable. I have social anxiety. I'm not very good at that kind of thing. Just maybe being around other people.
There's a great podcast with tons of people.
I mean, maybe other people are kind of hearing something familiar, and I'm not sure. As I say, it's there's a spectrum of people who love to be in the office, and that's just their way. I get it, but for me, I'm very much work from home. There's a quote in a movie I like called Barfly, where one character says to the other, I hate people. Do you hate people? And he says, I don't hate people actually, but I just tend to feel better when they're not around, which is exactly how I feel. Like I feel more at ease if I'm able to work in my own studio. So it's just me and my girlfriend share an apartment, and apart from that, I don't really socialize over much. I go to the beach now and again to play table tennis, but apart from that, quite happy just to be in my own little world. And I always found that office work, the actual design work, is easy. It's the hard part is commuting every day, being chirpy, being up in the mornings, working all day. When you're tired, when you want to go outside and sit in the sun, you can't because it's office hours. I just found that all very constricting. So, as I say, personal taste on that one. I like a more relaxed environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing as well is when you do start to freelance, you become very well. I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, but I become very, very aware of time and where my time's going. And the idea of now spending like 1.5, maybe an hour, maybe 1.5 hours commuting time every day, where you're sat in a car stuck in traffic, it honestly seems like a nightmare because you can spend that. I
found that very hard.
Yeah, because you can spend that time just either doing your work or doing what you're going to enjoy, and that time just essentially is going to waste because you're sat in traffic. So, for me, the idea of taking a studio job and being stuck in that traffic on the morning kind of puts me off a bit. But on the flip side, like you say, people do cause a lot of problems, but designers love problems, and so we need people. That's true. We need people to create problems. I think that solve them.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. What caused a lot of friction for me was that before COVID, people were less inclined to let you work flexibly, whereas COVID forced that on people. And so people are now a little bit more open to the idea that maybe you don't go into the office every single day. Maybe you go in for meetings on Monday and Wednesday, which I actually think is great. I used to love going in some days. It's just every day is a bit much. And especially when you think of, as you say, you're sitting in a winter traffic jam and it's stretching away into the future like every day. And you get home and you're knackered, you're in a bad mood. You just want to go to bed. And the next morning you've got to get up and do it all again and again and again. I just found it really depressing, frustrating, expensive because it's costing you a fortune to get in and out. Or you can live somewhere near the studio, which is there's nothing to do there and the rent's very expensive. So it was a real bind. And the design work was the least of my worries after a lot. And this is going back years. Every time I've worked in a studio, it's me, not them. Like they're not the ones at fault. I just don't like going into an office every day. So the only office I can work in is in my own office.
And it's funny that it actually took COVID for some studios to realise that some people are probably more effective working from home. I know some people, obviously, like you said, they do need to go in because they need to be in that particular place around people and just and they work better. But like I say, it's funny how it took COVID and forcing you to work at home to get that data back that actually we're producing more. and
Yeah.
the staff, some of the staff are actually producing more than they would if they came into office. So I thought that was interesting. It's a good point to bring up.
And you can already feel the pressure to go back to the way things were. People are already starting to say you've got to come in every day and stuff to employees. Jacob Rees-Mogg was in the news saying this the other day to his staff, and I'm sure people who rent offices want that to be the case. And I'm sure there are certain processes in the games development that being in a room together is productive. I certainly, like I say, I love the idea of going into an office at certain points, to meet everyone face to face, hash out ideas, have a game dev day, jamming ideas, things like that. That's brilliant, but just not every day. So
yeah, exactly. No, that's a really, really good point. And okay. That was absolutely awesome. We covered a lot of stuff there. I know we talked a lot about June and different books and different inspirations and advice you would give. But before we wrap up, are there any other pieces that you want to talk about, or is this any parting words or anything you want to chat about?
I should have prepared something, shouldn't I? Let me have a look. So I would say keep other interests is obviously key. I'm a big fan of just gaming. I love video games. My games and art have gone hand in hand. Ever since, literally going back to the 90s, I had an Amiga 500 computer.
Right.
Which you could play little games on, like Worms and Lemmings and Elite. The ancestor of today's Elite Dangerous was Elite 2 on the Amiga 500. And at the same time, I had what would eventually evolve into Photoshop, a program called Deluxe Paint. And you could make little animations and little pixel art and stuff. But whilst gaming and drawing, they were the same activity to me, really. I've always loved gaming. I've always loved drawing. And I think that philosophy of video games where you have to just try and do the level until you get to the end, again and again and again. And then you get to the point where you're so good at the game that you're speed running the level, or you're trying to do backflips all the way through, or you know what I mean? Like, I really like watching speed runs on YouTube, for example. People do insane speed runs of games. I love that.
Right, okay.
And there's a vibe of that repetition, practice makes perfect in design as well. So just practice, and all your mistakes are lessons that will teach you something new. Scientists, when they do an experiment, even if they get a null result, that is a useful piece of information that they can add to their total store of information. So every failure, every screw up, figure out what it was that you did wrong, and next time you can dodge it, maybe, or the time after next, or the 20 times after that in my case normally, but eventually you improve. Just being a little bit better each day, that's what it's all about. It's not about being the best in the world or anything like that. Just a little bit better than you were yesterday, then you'll win.
So, all right. So, thank you, Alex, for coming on and for sharing your process and talking through the different images in your portfolio. It's been really interesting seeing your process, and obviously I picked up a lot of different books I'm going to read as well after this is done. And that was really good.
It's a pleasure, Ryan. Thanks very much, mate.
Yeah. Okay, so if you want to go over to Alex's Patreon page, you can go over and see her work and sign up to her memberships. So you've got the June heads, which is only £1 per month. You got Worms, £4 per month, and £8 per month. So what you can get is you can get some artwork, I believe. You can see some breakdowns, some tutorials, some notes. So there's different tiers, and you can go over there and check it out and join. So that's Patreon.com/Alex June Brady. So go over there and check that out. So thanks again, Alex, for coming on. It's been absolutely amazing, like I say, going through your work.
Thanks very much, Ryan. It's been a real pleasure. I can't wait to see you and everyone in August.